So today we're going to get into building out a circus tent in Adobe Photoshop using basic shapes. We're going to start by going up to create out a new document. We hit New File. And we're going to pick out a letter size document, keeping a standard document 8.5 by 11 at 300 ppi. With this document, I first want to look to fill in the area. As we get into this project, you can pause, rewind, go back through, slow down the process or the video as needed. But I hope you can enjoy the process in building out a circus tent with basic shapes. So our background layer, we're going to go over to our paint bucket tool. I'm going to pick out something a little bit darker so our color can stand out. Once I have the area filled with our background, I'm going to create a new layer for the main portion of my tent. And the naming of the layers isn't significant in this moment, as we are going to look to combine layers later on. But I'm going to start by going over to the rectangle marquee tool. With the rectangle marquee tool, I'm going to draw out a rectangular shape that goes across the page. If I do click and hold, it will do a good job of finding the middle of the page so I can make sure that things are aligned. And I'm going to fill this in with a red color. You can pick out any colors you like, but I'm just going with a more traditional tent look. I can deselect either down at the bottom bar or hitting Command or Control D. Then I'm going to go over to my rectangle marquee tool again. Before I start drawing out, I want to make sure to create out a new layer. This new layer I'm just going to call Stripe, just so we clearly separate our tent from the stripe that we're going to use to build out the tent. Again, with the rectangle marquee tool, I'm going to look to draw out a white stripe that goes vertically down the page, keeping relatively the same width as the red area to the left of it. Once I have this, we're going to look to fill it in with white. I can change out my foreground color and click inside the area. Rather than drawing out piece by piece, I'm going to use my move tool to create duplicates of this bar that we've just created. Holding down Alt or Option, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac, I can click and drag this off to the side, creating some distance, trying to maintain consistency from the left side with the original bar that we have, the stripe that we have. Once I have one, I'm going to repeat the process. But this time when I do drag it out to the side, Photoshop usually does a good job of giving me the measurements that I can line up and maintain the same distance as I did previously. If they're not accurate, or if you need to adjust slightly, you can always just simply move them. Take your time to get the measurements right. I'm just trying to even it out on all my documents. And I have a couple extra layers, I'm just going to delete them out. They're not necessary. But I can continue the process. Again, hold down Alt or Option, click and drag off to the side. It is going to maintain the correct distance. To make sure that it does stay completely horizontal, I'm going to hold down Shift while also holding Alt. This will make sure that it doesn't go too high or get off of alignment, but maintains that overall look and feel. Now that we have these stripes and my tent layer, I'm going to look to combine this into one single layer. To do this, I'm going to go over to the Layers panel, click on the top layer, and I can hold down Shift on my keyboard and click on the tent layer. When I click on the tent layer, you see that it selects out all the layers in between. You could also always hold down Control and click on individual layers. Command on a Mac, Control on a PC. But you don't have to go in any type of order with holding down Command and Control. Just understand that you're looking to select out all the layers, not including the background. Once those layers are selected, I'm going to right click and merge layers. That combines it into one. Now I'm going to create a new layer for the top of my tent. Let's call it top for now. And you notice that when I did merge these layers, my stripe copy 5 is maintaining the name of the highest layer that we had, but I'm just going to say this main tent. At the top of the tent, I'm going to go over to my polygon lasso tool. With my polygon lasso tool, I'm going to go to the top corner of my rectangle. If you need to redraw at any point, you can always hit escape to start a new line. I'm going to try finding the middle of the page, which I know should be at about 4 1/4. I can click a point, move over to the side, down to the bottom or the top right side of my rectangle, and then connect back to where I started. Once I have this, I'm going to look to fill it in with red. Click inside. Now we're going to go back over to our polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to deselect so I can start drawing out new lines. If you need to make any tweaks before you do start to draw out the shapes, I can always use the selection tool and modify the shape out. But I'm going to look to use the polygon lasso tool. I'm going to connect from the top of the stripes of our main tent to the top point of our tent. I'm just going to click point by point to draw these out. Rather than filling in individually, I can hold down Shift on my keyboard and I can add in multiple selections. But I'm always going back up to that top point. Just take your time to make sure you get them right. And then once I do connect all 5 of them, or however many stripes you did have, I'm going to use the paint bucket to fill these in with white. And this time I am going to fill it on the top layer, since we've done them all at the same time and we don't need to create any alignments. Fills in, and we have that connection from the top point down to the stripes of our main tent. Once we have this, now it's time to get into modifying out our shape. I do like to create out duplicates of the layers just in case I mess up, but we're going to also do this today so you can see the difference between very flat looking tent shape to having the more three-dimensional look. Over in my layers panel, I'm going to select out both the top layer and the main tent layer. I can either hold down Shift, select out both, or hold down Control or Command and select out both. I'm going to right click on the layer and duplicate layers. Then I'm going to hide the original 2 so they don't interfere. We're going to start with the main tent to be able to modify this. With the main tent selected, I'm going to hit Command or Control T. This brings up our bounding box around the outside edge. I'm going to right click on the area and hit Warp. With Warp, we get these anchor points appearing around the outside. In certain settings, you'll get the actual grid to show up on our example. But it's all a matter of just modifying out the anchor points that you see here. So what I'm going to first look to do is pull out the bottom right and left side. And click and drag it outward. Again, if you do hold Shift, you should be able to maintain alignment so that it stays exactly horizontal. I'm going to pull the anchor point up on the left side inward. This gives more of a drapery of the tent. I'm going to do this over on the other side as well. We're going to continue to make sure that this happens on both sides. It creates the sense of symmetry. Then down at the bottom of our tent, we want to round it out to create the sense that it is three-dimensional. I'm going to pull down the one anchor point on the left and then pull down the anchor point on the right. Finally, I'm going to look to click and drag the top middle left and top middle right anchor points a little bit downward, again creating that sense that it is rounded coming towards us. But now that we've modified out the shape, I'm going to hit enter or return. Then we're going to select on our top copy, and again we're going to hit Command or Control T. Right click on the actual object and then hit warp. First, we want to make sure that we're getting the stripes aligned, so I'm going to click and drag the anchor point downward. I'll do it over on the other side as well. And take your time just to make sure that they're lining up as accurately as possible. Once we have the bottom edge, I'm going to look to modify out my left side first. I'm just going to click and drag this inward. We start to get a little curve on the draping. As we do this more for all the anchor points over on this side, it's going to give us a sense that it is kind of swooping down on the left. But once we get the left side, we want to repeat the same distance, same anchor points, clicking and drag them in. This is where you should take your time, make sure that you're relatively getting accurate. But do your best to eye it up as symmetrically as possible. Once I'm satisfied with it, again, I can hit enter or return. Now that we have this, we want to create some three-dimensionality to the object. I'm going to select on the main tent, go over to my burn tool. Burn tool's left side navigation. With the burn tool, because I have white and red, I do want to switch my settings so that my exposure is going to be set up to 50, just a standard exposure, but my range is going to be set to highlights. Please double check to make sure that your hardness is down so we have a soft burn on the objects. And I'm going to roughly have about 400 for the size of my brush. If I want to adjust the size of my brush, I can hit right or left bracket to adjust it up. I can tap my left bracket to make it smaller, or right bracket to make it bigger. So because we have the main tent copy, we're going to look to burn the top edge of this. I'm going to click and drag across, and we see that we get this nice little shade to help separate the top of my tent versus the bottom main area. I can do this 2 or 3 times. I wouldn't overdo it though. If you end up overdoing, it gets too dark, so I can always hit Control or Command Z to step back. We're just looking for a separation from the top to bottom. Once we have the top edge burnt, we're going to also do the sides, make it look like they're a little bit more three-dimensional. Darker over on the sides allows the sense that, again, it is further back on the sides and closer up in the front. So about 3 or 4 on the sides, and then we also want to do the sides of our top copy. Now I'm going to click and drag. Again, just darkening up some of those edges. So just take your time to add in those shadows, but we're creating that three-dimensionality, a lot different from what the original tent as that flat version looked like. Now that we have the main tent completed, we're going to get into adding in details. I'm going to first look to create a new layer for my flagpole. I'm going to zoom in towards the top of my tent to start building out my flagpole. I can either use the zoom tool, zoom in, or hit Control plus sign, and you can zoom in to the top of our tent. I want to make sure that I have room up at the top of my tent. If you need to move your tent a little bit downward, I can always click on the move tool. First tool, left side navigation. I'm going to select on the top part of my tent, then hold down shift and select on the bottom part of my tent. You see that both are highlighted in my layers. Then I can look to drop this down, clicking and dragging So it becomes leaving us a lot more room on the top. So once I have the top layers, I'm going to go back to my flagpole layer. I'm going to go over to the polygon and lasso tool, third tool, left side navigation. I'm going to click little points to help try to create the sense of a curve at the bottom of this pole. Then I'm going to go upward and add in a couple anchor points and then connect back down to where we started. Once I have the flagpole, I'm going to look to fill it in with a darker gray. If I look at the left side on my color, on the color picker in the top right, about halfway down is a medium gray. I'm going to go about 3/4 of the way down and get this darker gray. But with this darker gray, I'm going to look to fill it in, use a paint bucket, and click inside the area. Right now, it is just a standard flat dark gray color, but to add in the dimensionality, I'm going to go over to my dodge tool. The dodge tool, left side navigation, located in the same location as our burn tool. With the dodge tool, again, I want to make sure that my hardness is down. I'm going to look to use my dodge tool to help create out a highlight that goes in the middle of this pole. To make sure that it's accurate, make sure that's straight. It's very hard to get a straight line when you just click and drag upward. It ends up going all over the place. The hand is not steady with the mouse. So I can always hit Command or Control Z. But to create out a highlight, I'm going to shrink down my brush to about 15 to 20 pixels. I'm going to click a point at the bottom, then move my cursor right to the top middle. Holding down Shift, it's going to make a connection from point A to point B, adding in this highlight in between. I'm going to shrink my brush down further, about 10 pixels. Again, I'm going to click a point at the bottom, hold down Shift, click a point at the top. It automatically creates out what almost looks like a highlight sitting in between this area. You can always keep adding in or tweaking this size, adding in more highlight. It's up to you to really see how far you want to bring it. When now I deselect, you can see that it's not just a flat gray bar, but creating out the sense of a three-dimensional pole that's sticking out and holding up the tent. Bring down my brushes a little bit more. If I don't use my burn tool, I can always use the burn tool to darken up some edges. Again, the burn tool is located in the same location. I'm going to shrink down my brush a lot, but I'm going to go over to the sides of my object, sides of the pole, and then click. So this will burn out the edges, darkening up the sides, but leaving our middle whiter. And make sure you do adjust your tones. You may want to go to mid-tone for your burn tool because we're dealing with the darker color. Gets a little bit more accuracy for going along the edge of that pole. Now for the flagpole, we need a flag. So I'm going to create a new layer and call it flag. And we're going to go over to the polygon and lasso tool. With the polygon and lasso tool, I'm going to go to the right side of the flagpole, click out a point, and then draw out a long flag that goes off to the right side of it. I'm going to connect back to where I started. And then you can fill this in with whatever color you like. Just to change it up, I'll do a bluish color or light blue color. Use the paint bucket and fill it in. I can deselect, click on the bar, or hit Command or Control D. Now that it's filled in, we want to modify this. Make it look more like a flag. It's too stiff at the moment. To be able to modify it, I'm going to hit Command or Control T, our transform shortcut key. I'm going to right click on the object and hit warp. When I hit warp, like we did with modifying out the tent, I could grab these anchor points, but it's a lot easier if we take advantage of the default settings and the presets that we're offered. At the top navigation, you'll see warp with a custom dropdown. if I go through these options, there's an option that says flag. So we might as well take advantage of this. And we see that it wraps the flag going upward, then downward, kind of moving like if it was in the wind. And we can adjust our flag bend based over on the right side of where we just changed the drop down. I'm going to go over to the bend, and I can move my cursor directly on the word bend and either click and drag left, bend the opposite way, or drag right and extend it more. It really depends on what you're looking for the flag shape. But you can go back and forth to see how it's going to sway between the two. Once I'm satisfied with it though, if I do want to get into more customization with the warp, I can always go back over to my custom settings, and I can modify a couple anchor points if I want to tweak it a little bit. Once I'm satisfied with it though, I'm going to hit enter, go over to my burn tool, and with my burn tool I can darken up some areas just to make the flag seem as if it is extending or is showing shadows. I'm going to switch over to highlight since I have a light blue color. And then I'm just going to click and drag inside the area of the flag, darkening up some areas. Once I'm satisfied with the look, I'm going to now take a look at the bottom and building out the opening for our tent. But we zoom out, we can see that we now have a flagpole. Now we're going to get the opening. So we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it opening. I'm going to start by clicking over on the polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to look to draw out a triangle that connects up to the middle top part of our tent. And I want to keep it as symmetrical as possible. But I'm going to connect directly straight across back to where I started. I'm going to fill this in with black. Use the paint bucket, fill in the area. I'm going to deselect. Then we're going to look to use the warp tool again. I'm going to go back over to my move tool, hit Command or Control T, right click on the object and warp. With warp, I'm going to first bend the bottom portion, making sure that it aligns to the bottom of my tent. Then I'm going to look to pull in the sides, just like we did with the top of our tent. I can click and drag them to create out a curve on the inside. Just take your time to tweak it, but we're looking to get this nice curve happening on the inside or on the right and left side of the object. And when I am satisfied with it, I can hit return or enter. Now we're going to add in some flaps to make it appear as if this opening is in this triangular shape. Imagine that a flap is being lifted up. We're going to create those flaps for the shape. So I'm going to rename my new layer flap. Go over to my polygon lasso tool. Click a point at the top of my opening tent. I'm going to click my point a little bit shorter and then off to the side over on the right side of my tent. Rather than drawing out the second one, we can always just flip the first one, but I'm going to fill this in with a darker red color. I go back over to my red, pick out a darker red, and fill this area in. Once I have it, I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to again hit Control T, right click on the object, and hit warp. With the warp now, I'm going to look to bend out my lines and pull down the bottom side to match to the opening of my tent. On the inside, I can click and drag, and you start to see that it actually shows the grid as I click and drag. Take your time with it. So once I have that bend, I'm going to look to now make sure I'm just satisfied with the overall look and feel of the flap. I can always, again, click and drag inside the area to modify the flap in some way. But it gives us a good, nice sense that the flap is being pulled from the object. So I can hit enter. Now I'm going to look to take this flap and bring it to the other side, creating out a duplicate. I'm going to right click on the layer, duplicate out layer. With my flap copy, I'm going to call it flap left so I can remember. I again want to hit Command or Control T, bring up my transform, right click on it, and then this time I'm going to hit flip horizontal so I can pull this over to my left side. If it does need any tweaking, if something isn't aligned, I could always just rotate it into the correct position. You can see it could still use a little bit of tweaking at the top edge. Now that I have the flaps for both sides, I'm going to burn this a little bit just to give a sense that this is three-dimensional. I can make my brush a lot larger. I'm going to change my burn to midtones again, darken this up, and click and drag inside of the area to burn in the shadow on the object. Make sure that you understand that if I'm trying to color or darken up the right side and it's not working, you have to maintain your layers. Right now I'm on the left flap only, so I'm only going to be able to burn the left side of my flaps. Then we'll go over to the original flap, click and drag inside that object as well, burn that out. I can always go over to my dodge tool if you want to lighten up some areas. Dodge tool, I'm going to switch over to my midtones. Increase the size of my brush. That dodge just helps to create a little bit of a highlight on top of these areas. Now that I have my flaps, we're just looking for the final details. Final details are some ropes to give it the sense that it is tied down. So we're going to create a new layer for our ropes. And I'm going to make my ropes a gold color, just so they stand out. I'm going to click on my paintbrush to draw out my ropes. I can increase the size. Right now I'm at about 4 pixels. I'm going to increase it up to 8 so we can see it a little bit better. To draw out a straight line with the brush tool, it's again like we're adding a highlight on top of the flagpole. We want to click a point first, move down to new area, then click a point, and it automatically makes a connection from point A to point B. If I try drawing out a line straight with my hand, it's never going to be exactly accurate. But as long as we are clicking a point, holding shift, then clicking point again, it does a great job of making that straight line that we need. I'm going to add a couple other lines over on the sides just to make my tent build up. And I'll also zoom in to add in a couple ropes at the top where my flag is connected. I can shrink down the size of my brush a little bit. Click a point, connect two. I could always freeform some lines as well if I wanted to act as if this flag was kind of wrapped and tied down. I can just click and drag to create out a couple lines. But if I zoom out, we now have our tent. Check back to see any more tutorials that might assist you in building your skills in Adobe Photoshop. Thank you, and have a great day.